As we fix our eyes on the Finance Minister, let's touch base with our team in Parliament, where preparations are well underway ahead of the tabling of the 2020 budget. Newzroom Africa's very own Athi Mtongana is at the parliamentary precinct, helping us make sense of these developments in the lead-up to that all-important speech. Athi, the Finance Minister certainly doesn't need us to remind him. He's got his work cut out for him. But what, nonetheless, should we be looking out for?
Of course, a lot of South Africans are expecting Tito Mboweni, the Minister of Finance, to tackle the issue around the ailing state-owned enterprises in the country which continuously rely on government bailouts. And in fact, Ayanda, I've just seen now the President of the Republic of South Africa, President Cyril Ramaphosa, just being escorted in. So he is here. He will be sitting in the National Assembly when the Minister delivers sharp at 2 o'clock inside the National Assembly, that all-anticipated budget speech. But Ayanda, I'm not alone right now. I am joined by Ayabonga Cawe, who's going to give us an idea. I know a lot of South Africans are obviously saying this is one of the most important budget speeches of that people really should expect in the country, but I think I've heard this so many times, but I really want to find out what makes this one in particular so important.
The stakes couldn't be higher, Athi. You would have heard in the medium-term budget policy statement in October that the budget shortfall then was 52.5 billion rand. Now, that might sound very inconsequential in over R1 trillion in a budget, but if you think about what some of that money is spent on the expenditure side of things, we've also heard that in the next few years or so, debt servicing costs, if we don't get our debt contained, could potentially be the highest line item in that budget in the next few years or so. It certainly is at this point the fastest growing item on that budget. In a budget, as you would know, where just shy of half of that is spent on education, healthcare and some of the social services that we have.
But do you really think there's enough focus in terms of those particular sectors? You mentioned education and health. Do you think there needs to be more focus in terms of how monies are spent and how more money needs to be allocated?
I think you're right, Athi. The money is allocated. I mean, if you look at some of the division of revenue tables at the end of the budget that Minister Mboweni will be presenting today, you will see that there's things like the school infrastructure improvement grant that are there. There's the school nutrition grant, for instance. So a lot of money extended even for things that are outside just the classroom activities in the education sector. And similarly, if you think about the health facility improvement grant and even some of the indirect grants in relation to NHI, it's quite clear that the allocations are happening. The big question is, where is the bang for buck? Is there efficacy of some of the money that we're spending? And I think from some of the remarks that come out of the AG, you can clearly see that we're probably not spending the money as we ought to, and we don't have the right controls in place across the different levels of government to ensure that that money is actually being spent for the use that it's been allocated for.
Definitely. Now, looking at state-owned enterprises, SAAs, obviously one that a lot of people are looking very closely at. We spoke to a minority party, Aljama, earlier on, and they had mentioned to us that they were in conversation with the minister before his busy schedule this week, and he obviously mentioned SAA. We know how dire the situation is there, and looking at other SOEs which contribute to the fiscal of the country, Eskom, what kind of idea or what kind of direction do you think the minister is going to take regarding those?
Well, we have received some direction around what that is going to look like, especially in the case of Eskom, where we've heard about that special appropriation of 45 billion rand in 1 year and 22 billion rand in the next. So we're kind of clear when it comes to Eskom. I think the big debate is really around SAA and some of the other state-owned companies that we have, not only at a national level, I must add, Athi, but even at a local level. If you think about some of the major failures in some of our water boards and the difficulty that creates for many working class communities, then it's quite clear that the crisis of dysfunction that we see in our SOEs is much wider than the ones that we often talk about. When it comes to SAA, I think a lot of big decisions are awaited in this particular speech. I think the ratings agencies are waiting. I think many of the employees at SAA and many of the trade unions are also waiting for some direction. But the big issue is that there's a business rescue process underway. And there should be some patience in waiting for the outcome of that business rescue plan. And I think the government is probably waiting for that plan as much as many of us are.
Indeed, as well as SCOPA, the oversight here in Parliament, also looking very closely and given the entity actually enough time to formulate this plan and make sure that they table it and come and present it before SCOPA. But there's a lot that we can talk about, Ayanda, but I think that's where we'll leave it for now. We will continue to have this conversation here in Parliament.